Hello, dear soul. I'm so glad you're here. If you've had a long day, or your thoughts just won't settle, this sleep story is for you. Tonight we'll drift into the quieter corners of history, not the battles or the glory, but the secrets hidden behind palace walls and the truths quietly buried in time. This is History for Sleep, and these are some of the most curious cover-ups in the story of humankind. So lie back, breathe deeply, and if you'd like to return to this calm space again, feel free to subscribe. And if your heart feels open, a kind comment is always welcome. Now, let's begin. What if one of the most iconic stories in human history never actually happened? You know the tale. A giant wooden horse, cunning Greek warriors hidden inside, a city tricked, betrayed, and burned to the ground. It's one of the oldest stories we've ever told, but what if the Trojan horse was never real? What if it was a cover-up? Let's go back, over 3,000 years ago, to a windswept coastline where two mighty worlds clashed, the Greeks and the Trojans. For 10 years, the Greek army had camped outside the towering walls of Troy. 10 long years of siege, of arrows in the sky and bones in the soil, and still, the city would not fall. Then, one morning, silence. The Greek camp was empty. Gone were the sails, the fires, the swords. Only a single strange object remained in the sand, a towering wooden horse, solemn and still. The Trojans, believing the war was over, dragged the horse into their city as a symbol of victory. That night, they feasted, and while they slept, Greek soldiers crept out from inside the hollow horse, opened the gates, and Troy burned. But here's the question that haunts historians. Where did this story come from? And more importantly, why? No ancient record from Troy itself has ever been found to confirm the horse. Only Greek accounts survive, poetic ones, written centuries later. Archaeological digs at the site believed to be Troy show that the city was indeed destroyed by fire around 1200 BCE. But there's no sign of a massive wooden structure, no proof of a clever trick, no evidence of anything but violent conquest. Some believe the horse was never a horse at all. It may have been a siege engine, a battering ram, or war tower nicknamed the Horse for its size or shape. Others think it might have been a ship. Ancient vessels were often decorated with animal heads and could be misunderstood in retellings. But there's an even more unsettling theory, that the entire story was invented, not to glorify the Greeks, but to justify them. A tale to smooth over the reality of what happened. A brutal slaughter, a city sacked and civilians killed. A victory, not through brilliance, but through brute force. By turning that story into a myth, the Greeks didn't just shape history, they silenced it. It's easier to sleep at night believing we outwitted the enemy than to admit we burned them alive. And so the story was told, again and again, in halls, in scrolls, in classrooms, a bedtime tale of cleverness. But somewhere, beneath layers of rubble and centuries of sand, the truth lies curled in the ashes. Not every legend begins with a lie, but some end with one, carefully carved, like a wooden horse, to be dragged quietly into memory. Sleep now, Troy is gone, but the question it leaves behind still lingers. Was it ever real? What if the most famous boy king in history didn't die by accident? He was young, barely 19, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, holding the crook and flail like a child playing king. And then, suddenly, gone. Tutankhamun. You know his name because of the golden mask, the dazzling treasure sealed in his tomb. But his death remains a riddle wrapped in silence. Why would a healthy teenager, a ruler no less, simply fall ill and die? That's the mystery. And for nearly 100 years, Egyptologists have whispered the same forbidden question. Was Tutankhamun murdered? Let's step softly into the twilight of the 18th dynasty. The boy pharaoh had inherited more than a throne. He had inherited a religious war. His father Akhenaten had tried to overthrow the ancient gods of Egypt, replacing centuries of belief with a single sun deity, Aten. It was a revolution that split temples, priests, and power itself. When Tutankhamun came to power, his advisors quickly reversed course. The old gods were restored, the statues of Aten were broken, but tensions remained, and so did enemies. Tutankhamun had few allies, and many who stood to benefit from his death. His powerful vizier, an older man always at his side, took the throne almost immediately after Tut's death. He even married the boy's widow, quickly, quietly. Strange, isn't it? Even stranger are the wounds on the young king's body. Modern CT scans of his mummy revealed a shattered leg, possibly a fall, possibly not. But then came something more troubling, a fracture at the base of the skull. Was it from the mummification process or from a blow? No records exist of Tutankhamun's final days, no priestly mourning hymns, no formal announcement of a royal death, only a hurried burial in a tomb not meant for a pharaoh. The chamber was small. The paint was still wet on the walls when they sealed it. It was as if they wanted him gone. Quickly. Some historians suggest malaria played a role. Others point to a genetic bone disease. But none of these fully explain the rush, the silence, the missing funerary rituals. Was it disease or palace intrigue? In the cool silence of the Valley of the Kings, we find no clear answer, only gold and mystery. Tutankhamun is remembered because we found his tomb, but even in death, he is surrounded by secrets. If he was murdered, no one was ever punished. No confession was made, only the faint whisper of ambition and the eerie echo of a crown passed too easily to the next man. The golden mask still gazes through the centuries, not with answers, but with silence. And in that silence, the truth still waits, wrapped in linen and dust, deep beneath the desert stars. What if an entire king, a god on earth, was erased from history, not by time, but by design? This is the story of a man who changed everything and was punished for it with silence. His name was Akhenaten. He ruled Egypt over 3,000 years ago, during the height of the 18th dynasty, the same golden age that gave us Tutankhamun and dazzling temples. But Akhenaten was no ordinary pharaoh. He was a revolutionary. and his revolution was spiritual. For centuries, Egypt had worshipped a vast pantheon of gods: Osiris, Isis, Thoth, Anubis, Ra, each with their temples, their priests, their traditions. But Akhenaten cast them aside, all of them. He declared that there was only one god, Aten the sun disk, a god without a face, without myth, just pure divine light. And in a single generation, he reshaped Egypt's religion, art, architecture, even its capital city. He abandoned Thebes and built a new city from the ground up, Akhenaten, the horizon of Aten, a place meant to reflect the divine presence of his new god. The old temples were shuttered. Priests lost their power. Statues were smashed. He even changed his own name, from Amenhotep IV to Akhenaten, servant of the sun. To some, it looked like enlightenment. To others, like heresy. He was not just changing religion. He was threatening the power structures that had ruled Egypt for centuries. But during his lifetime, few dared challenge him. He was, after all, the pharaoh, the living god. And then he vanished. Historians believe Akhenaten died after 17 years of rule. What followed was chaos. His son, Tutankhamun, quietly changed his name to Tutankhamun, returning Egypt to the old gods. The capital was abandoned. Temples to Aten fell into ruin, and the priests who once served in silence rose up again. Then came the cover-up. Akhenaten's name was chiseled out of monuments, his statues shattered, his city left to bake in the desert sun. His memory was labeled heretic. Later king lists, meant to document the royal line, skipped over his reign entirely. It was as if he had never existed. And for over 3,000 years that erasure worked. No one spoke his name. No one remembered his god. It wasn't until the 19th century, when archaeologists stumbled upon the ruined city of Amarna, that Akhenaten was rediscovered. A pharaoh scrubbed from history. And what a mystery he left behind. Was he the world's first monotheist? A man ahead of his time? Or a power-hungry radical who threatened the delicate balance of Egypt's divine rule? Some say his religious revolution may have inspired later monotheistic ideas. Others believe he was simply eccentric and dangerous. But whatever the truth, one thing is certain: his erasure was deliberate, a state-sponsored forgetting. Because sometimes history doesn't shout down its enemies, it simply deletes them, quietly, thoroughly, and almost completely. And yet, here we are, thousands of years later, whispering his name once more. Akhenaten, the pharaoh who dared to challenge the gods, and whose silence became a warning carved into stone. Tonight, his city sleeps beneath the desert winds, and in that silence, a forgotten sun still glows. Imagine knowing the future, but choosing to burn it. This is the story of the Sibylline Books, a sacred collection of ancient prophecies once held at the heart of Roman power, whispers from the gods, warnings of plague, famine, war, and how to stop them. They were consulted in times of desperation, when volcanoes rumbled or enemies closed in. The books were kept under lock and key, guarded in the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. Only the Senate could authorize a reading. Only a select group of priests could interpret the messages. And yet, these priceless, mysterious texts said to contain the fate of Rome itself, were deliberately destroyed. Not once, but multiple times. Let's start with how they were first acquired, or rather, how 3 books became 9, then 3 again, and then none at all. According to legend, during the reign of the last Roman king, Tarquin the Proud, an old woman arrived at court with 9 scrolls. She offered to sell them. Tarquin laughed. The price was outrageous. So the woman left and burned 3 of the scrolls. She returned with 6. Same price. Again, he refused. Again, she left and burned 3 more. Finally, she came back with only 3 scrolls remaining, still the same price. This time, Tarquin agreed. He paid. And those 3 surviving texts became the Sibylline Books, named after the Sibyl, a prophetic priestess whose voice was said to come from the gods. Were they really divine, or simply old, sacred poetry laced with warnings? We may never know. Because what happened next is where the true cover-up begins. Over centuries, Rome turned to the books during every major crisis. Famine in the countryside? Consult the Sibylline Books. Ominous dreams? Earthquake before a battle? The priests would descend into the temple and emerge with solemn instructions. Bury a foreign idol. Appease a forgotten god. Perform a ritual sacrifice. But the public never saw the texts. The Senate never read them. And slowly, the books became tools, not just for prophecy, but for control. They shaped public policy, justified wars, silenced critics. And always, the message came from beyond, wrapped in mystery. Then, in 83 BCE, a fire destroyed the temple of Jupiter, and with it, the Sibylline Books. Gone. Centuries of prophecies, incinerated. Or were they? Some say the priests scrambled to reconstruct the collection. They gathered fragments from across Italy and Greece, rebuilt what they could. Others say it was all a performance, that the books were never fully rewritten. In 405 CE, under Emperor Honorius, the books were permanently burned again, this time on purpose. Rome had become Christian. Pagan prophecy had no place in the empire anymore. And just like that, the last divine whispers of the Sibyls were turned to ash. Why would a society choose to destroy its most sacred texts? Maybe because prophecy is dangerous. Because when power speaks through mystery, truth becomes hard to trace. And sometimes, the future doesn't need to be rewritten. It just needs to be removed. So tonight, if you hear a rustling in your thoughts, like parchment crackling in flame, know that the Sibylline Books once held the secrets of emperors, the fears of kings, the fate of a republic. Now they are dust, and their silence echoes through time. Some cover-ups hide shame, others hide knowledge. This one may have hidden both. He conquered half the known world by the age of 30. He was never defeated in battle. He changed the shape of history, language, trade, culture, and power. And then he died, suddenly, quietly, far from home. This is the story of Alexander the Great, and the death no one dared to explain. In the summer of 323 BCE, Babylon was shimmering with heat. The Tigris River moved slowly through the city, thick with the scent of reeds and dust. Alexander had returned from a decade of endless conquest, from Greece to to Egypt, from Persia to the edges of India. His army had followed him across deserts, over mountains, through storms. Now, they waited. The empire was enormous, but unfinished. Alexander spoke of new campaigns, Arabia, perhaps even beyond. And then, over the course of just a few days, the greatest conqueror in the world fell ill. Fever, pain, weakness. His voice faded. His body could no longer move. And within 10 days, he was gone. No battle, no wound, no warning, just gone. The world was stunned. His generals were stunned. But something was off. There was no consensus on how he died. Some said malaria, some typhoid, others poison. In fact, some claimed his body showed no signs of decay. For 6 days, an unnatural preservation that fed the myth. Was Alexander even human? But the more likely explanation was far darker. In Babylon, Alexander had begun to act strangely in his final days. He had executed close advisors. He had demanded divine honors. He had pushed away trusted generals and elevated lesser men. And as the illness took hold, his inner circle began whispering, if Alexander died without an heir, the empire would splinter. And so they waited, they watched. When asked who should rule after him, he reportedly answered, to the strongest. But others said he never spoke at all. After his death, his body was placed in a golden sarcophagus. It was meant to be returned to Macedon, to his mother, his homeland. But it never arrived. It was hijacked in Egypt and eventually buried in Alexandria. But even that tomb disappeared. To this day, the final resting place of Alexander the Great has never been found. One of the most powerful men in history simply vanished from the earth. So what really happened? Some historians believe Alexander was poisoned, perhaps by Antipater, a powerful regent back in Greece who feared losing influence. Others suggest his own generals, tired of his ambition, quietly ended his reign. But if there was a plot, it was the perfect one. No confession, no trial, just a fever, a deathbed, and a power vacuum. And within days of his passing, the empire began to crumble. Factions emerged, wars erupted. His body became a prize, passed between hands, paraded for power. What does it say? That the man who united the world could not hold his own death. Perhaps this was the final conquest, to disappear so completely that no truth could follow. Because sometimes the most effective cover-up is confusion. And tonight, in the hush of history, you can still feel the dust settle in Babylon, the torches flicker in a silent palace, and a whisper, maybe real, maybe imagined, says, he didn't die, he was taken. But we'll never know, and perhaps that's exactly how they wanted it. Imagine an entire civilization wiped from memory, not just conquered, not just defeated, but deleted. This is the story of Carthage, and how one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world was carefully, strategically, and permanently erased. Carthage was once a jewel of the Mediterranean, located in what is now Tunisia. It was a city of towering harbors, brilliant engineers, and vast merchant fleets. Founded by Phoenician settlers, Carthage grew rich through trade, silk from the east, ivory from Africa, tin from the north. It rivaled Greece in culture and Rome in ambition. But to Rome, Carthage was a threat, a powerful one. For over a century, the two cities battled in what we now call the Punic Wars, 3 brutal conflicts that stretched across continents. Carthage's most famous general, Hannibal, crossed the Alps with elephants, a feat that still astounds military historians today. He won battle after battle, but in the end, Rome endured. And when the Third Punic War came, Rome was done tolerating survival. They wanted erasure. In 146 BCE, Roman forces stormed Carthage one final time. The city fell after a prolonged siege. What happened next wasn't just conquest, it was annihilation. The population was slaughtered. Those who remained were enslaved. The city was burned to its foundations. And then, the story goes, Rome salted the earth so that nothing would grow there again. That part may be legend, but the intent was very real. The Romans didn't just destroy Carthage's walls, they destroyed its memory. They banned Carthaginian language from public use. They burned books. They rewrote history. And here's where the cover-up lives. Everything we know about Carthage today comes from Roman sources. The enemy wrote the biography, and that biography was unkind. Romans portrayed the Carthaginians as cruel, untrustworthy, barbaric. They emphasized tales of child sacrifice, of greed, of decay. But how much of that was true, we'll never know. Because Carthage never got to tell its side. Its libraries were destroyed, its temples demolished, its voices silenced. The Romans succeeded not just in defeating a rival, but in shaping how that rival would be remembered. And for over 2,000 years, it worked. Only in recent decades have archaeologists begun to reconstruct pieces of Carthaginian life, its article, its cities, its faith. What they're finding is not a barbaric culture, but a complex one, scientific, artistic, devout. The cover-up wasn't just physical, it was cultural, it was psychological, it was meant to last. Because Rome knew sometimes burning a city isn't enough. You have to burn the memory too. And yet, here you are, listening, whispering the name, Carthage, in the quiet of night, when empires are just echoes and fires long turn to ash. Perhaps that's what remains, a name they tried to silence, a people they tried to erase, still stirring, still breathing, in the dark. She sat above a crack in the earth, her eyes half closed, her voice slow, strange, drifting, and kings believed every word. This was the Oracle of Delphi, the most powerful woman in the ancient Greek world. She was called the Pythia, and for over 1,000 years she spoke the will of the gods. But tonight, we ask a quieter question. What if she wasn't speaking for the gods at all? What if she was speaking for men in power? Let's descend the stone path toward Mount Parnassus, where the temple of Apollo shimmered in the sun. Delphi was more than sacred. It was the center of the world, marked by the omphalos, the navel stone. People came from every corner of the Mediterranean, philosophers, generals, emperors, all seeking answers. Before every war, every alliance, every declaration. They stopped here first, and the Pythia answered, seated on a golden tripod, veiled, chanting, swaying. Her voice carried a strange rhythm, sometimes incoherent, sometimes precise. And yet, her answers shaped empires. Themistocles asked whether to face the Persian fleet. The oracle told him Athens would be saved by wooden walls. He built ships. He won the war. Croesus, king of Lydia, asked if he should attack Persia. The oracle said, "If you cross the river, you will destroy a great empire." He did, and lost his own. Prophecy with a twist. But how did she do it? Here begins the mystery and the cover-up. For centuries, no one could explain her trance-like state. Was she truly possessed? Was it ritual, or something else entirely? Ancient writers mention strange smells in the temple, sweet, heavy vapors that filled the air as she spoke. Then the temple was destroyed, first by fire, then by earthquakes, and finally by time. For over 1,500 years, Delphi was silent, until modern archaeologists rediscovered the ruins, and beneath the temple, they found something curious: a geological fault, a place where gases, ethylene in particular, could seep from the earth. Ethylene is sweet-smelling, and in high doses, it induces euphoria, trance, and hallucination. Was the Pythia inhaling natural gas? Was the voice of Apollo actually a geological phenomenon? It seems likely. But even more intriguing is how the oracle's words were controlled. You see, the Pythia never interpreted her own prophecies. That job belonged to the priests of Apollo. They heard her muttered phrases, her visions, and translated them for the world. And here lies the quiet manipulation. These priests were educated, politically connected, and deeply invested in shaping outcomes. So, who really shaped the prophecy? The gas, the gods, or the men behind the veil? The Oracle of Delphi lasted over a millennium, and in that time, it influenced wars, marriages, conquests, and colonization. But perhaps its greatest illusion was making the world believe it was divine. In truth, it was a delicate dance between science, suggestion, and power. Tonight the winds still rustle through Delphi's ruins. The stone columns lean gently into the hillside, and the crack in the earth remains, silent now. But long ago from that silence came visions, and some may have come from very human hands. So sleep now, dear listener, for even the gods sometimes need a script. Before Athens, before Sparta, before Rome carved its name into stone, there was a people who danced in palaces, painted dolphins on their walls, and built a civilization so advanced it didn't seem ancient at all. They were the Minoans, and then they were gone. No final battle, no farewell, no written explanation, just silence. This is the story of the first great civilization of Europe, and how it disappeared without a trace. Let's drift back in time to the island of Crete, around 2000 BCE. The Minoans lived in a world of elegance and abundance. They built sprawling palaces, the most famous at Knossos, with hundreds of rooms, indoor plumbing, paved roads. They traded with Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Aegean. They worshipped goddesses. They honored bulls. Their art was fluid, full of movement. They celebrated life with festivals, feasts, and graceful rituals. And unlike many ancient societies, they left behind no signs of war, no massive armies, no fortified walls. It was as if peace itself ruled the island. And then it ended. By around 1450 BCE, their cities were abandoned or burning. Their art stopped. Their language, known as Linear A, vanished, never deciphered. The palaces crumbled. The question still echoes through history. What happened to the Minoans? For decades, scholars blamed the volcano of Thera, the island we now call Santorini, one of the largest eruptions in recorded history. It tore the island apart. Ash darkened the skies. Tsunamis rolled across the Aegean. Could this be the moment the Minoans disappeared? Maybe. But here's where the cover-up begins. Not one of lies, but of forgetting. You see, the eruption happened around 1600 BCE, a full century before Minoan society collapsed. They survived it. So why did they fall later? Some suggest they were conquered by the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. Others suspect internal collapse, economic strain, famine, or plague. But there are no records, no final message, no Minoan historian to explain. Their language is undeciphered, their religion barely understood, their fate a mystery whispered between ruins and shorelines. And then there's this. What if the Minoans didn't vanish? What if they were absorbed, their stories taken, their names changed? Some scholars believe the myths of ancient Greece, including the tale of the labyrinth and the Minotaur, are warped echoes of Minoan culture. A peaceful people, reimagined as monstrous, a culture erased and repackaged as legend. Perhaps the true cover-up is the myth itself, and perhaps it's easier to explain the unknown with monsters and gods than to admit we simply do not know. Tonight, Crete is quiet. The palace of Knossos lies in sun-bleached fragments, and somewhere beneath the earth, a forgotten queen still dreams in a language no one can read. The Minoans built their world with grace and left it without a scream. And in that silence, history left the door open for stories, but locked away the truth. Sometimes, the most powerful words are the ones someone tried to bury. In 1947, in the desert hills of Qumran, near the Dead Sea, a Bedouin shepherd tossed a stone into a cave. Instead of hitting rock, it struck something that rang like pottery. Inside, he found jars, and inside those jars, scrolls, old, cracked, wrapped in linen, covered in writing no one had seen in nearly 2,000 years. This is the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the ancient community whose voice was almost lost forever. Over the following decade, hundreds of fragments were unearthed from 11 caves, scroll after scroll, written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Biblical texts, poems, prophecies, laws, mystical visions. Some were versions of scriptures we recognize, others were entirely unknown. And the more archaeologists studied them, the more unsettling the story became. because these scrolls weren't left behind by accident. They were hidden deliberately by a group known as the Essence, a radical Jewish sect who fled Jerusalem around the 2nd century BCE. They believed the world was corrupted, that the temple priests in Jerusalem had betrayed God, so they retreated to the desert to await the coming apocalypse. They lived simply, wrote obsessively, and prepared for war, not with weapons, but with words. Their writings were intense. They saw themselves as the true sons of light, surrounded by darkness. Their scrolls spoke of 2 messiahs, not one, of celestial battles, of angels and judgment, of a teacher of righteousness, whose name was never recorded. Then, around 68 CE, as Roman forces marched to crush the Jewish rebellion, the Essenes sealed their library inside caves and vanished. The Romans destroyed everything in their path. Qumran fell silent. The scrolls lay undisturbed for nearly 2 millennia. But when they were finally discovered, the silence didn't end. It deepened. You see, for decades, only a small group of scholars had access to the scrolls. They controlled what was translated, what was published, what was withheld. Some scrolls were locked away in archives. Others leaked slowly. Why? Because some of the writings challenged long-held beliefs. They suggested that early Judaism, and perhaps even early Christianity, had more diversity, more complexity than the official versions allowed. Alternative messiahs, conflicting laws, hidden teachers. In a world built on sacred texts, these fragments whispered forgotten possibilities, and that made them dangerous. It wasn't until the 1990s, under pressure from journalists and rival scholars, that the full collection was released to the public. Only then could the world begin to hear the voices that had once been sealed away. So what was the cover-up? Not the scrolls themselves, but the long delay, the fear of what they might reveal. Because sometimes it's not what we find that frightens us. It's what it forces us to reconsider. The Essenes are long gone. Their temple, their caves, their quiet prayers, all lost to time. But their words remain, faded, cracked, imperfect, and very much alive. Tonight, as your thoughts begin to soften, you can almost picture a hand, 2,000 years ago, carefully rolling up parchment, binding it in cloth, and hiding it in the shadow of stone. Not to preserve glory, but truth. A truth too fragile for power, too wild for temples, too sacred for fire. And now, whispered softly, to you. So many stories, so many silences. We've wandered through forgotten temples, stood beneath crumbling palaces, and listened for truths that once echoed, but were never meant to be found. Not all cover-ups are cruel. Some are quiet, some are careful, and some are simply time, folding over the past like a soft blanket. But tonight, we uncovered just enough, not to awaken the past, only to rest beside it. And if this journey brought your thoughts some peace, if you felt the hush of history soothe your mind, you can explore more whispered wonders anytime. The full History for Sleep playlist is waiting for you. You'll find the link in the comments below. And don't forget, if you'd like to return to this gentle space whenever the world feels too loud, you can subscribe. It's the easiest way to find your way back to this quiet sanctuary of sleep stories, where your thoughts can soften and your breath can slow. Now, let the last questions fade, let the names rest, and let yourself drift as the hush of the past settles into stillness. Good night, dear soul. May your dreams be peaceful and your heart unburdened until the next whisper finds you.